What if you could color each rock individually in the scene without creating any material instances? This is what I will be covering in this tutorial, and it's this feature called custom primitive data. And what it does is that it saves all that parameter information on the actual instance static meshes. And you can also use it on spline mesh components. So it's very useful for cables, for adding variation in your project, and it also reduces the amount of draw calls. This tutorial will be split up in 3 parts. The first one will just be pretty much straight up using a material on a instance static mesh. The second part will be how to use it in a blueprint to set your spline mesh actors, colors, and specularity. And then the third part will be how to set it up at runtime so that when you play, it updates every half second. All these meshes are just using this one material in this tutorial. I'll be using just a Unreal 5.2 blank project. So go ahead and open up your Unreal editor and then navigate to Games, blank. And then I'm just going to choose a Blueprint project. And just make sure to enable the starter content so we will have access to the placeable meshes with basic materials, and that will jumpstart our tutorial. And I just named mine custom prim data. And then go ahead and click on create. In our scene, we don't need a giant world, so I'm going to just go ahead and create a new level, and then just basic is good. And let's go ahead and create that. And I'm going to save this level as L_test map, the most descriptive level name. So now we actually want to just drag in some basic spheres just to showcase the different colors. So if you don't have the place actor panel, you can go ahead and navigate to this and then place actors panel. And then you can navigate to the shapes. We're going to drag this sphere in, and then you can drag it up by dragging the blue arrow, so the Z up, and then you can click the End key on your keyboard, and that will rest it nicely on the floor. And we're going to duplicate that 2 more times. So what you can do is you can just hold Alt on your keyboard, and then drag wherever you want it to go, and it will duplicate your actor. And they all have this basic shape material. We're going to actually use that material as a base for our test. So you can navigate to the material by clicking on this button. And then let's go ahead and Control C to copy and navigate back to all content. So you don't actually want to edit any engine content, because what will happen is that you'll have a different version of a material on your machine locally, and others won't have the same if you work in a team. So yeah, and then we're going to paste our material. And I'm going to rename this to M_color material for prim data. So this is the material that we're going to use on all 3 of them. And then the mesh will store the information about the parameters that we want to change on this material. Let's go ahead and double click on that material to open it up. Okay, so you can see that there's already a color parameter, which is a vector 4. So there's 4 float values. And we're going to just make a new value for the specular. So you can right click, promote to parameter, and it's nice, it already names it specular. Okay, and then we're going to save. Okay, and then we'll start setting up our primitive data. So essentially what you can do is in the specular, I'm going to check on use custom primitive data. So this will allow your meshes to hold the information that this parameter will be set to. And I am putting this one as index 0, and I will make the color also be able to use the custom primitive data. So I'll set that to true. And then, so the index is got to be 1 because the specular is already at 0. So if the color was at index 0, it would mean that the specular would need to be at index 3 because the primitive data, there's a maximum of 32, and they're all from 0 to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. So they're in a certain order. Okay, so one thing about custom primitive data is that it defaults to 0. So the color will always look black. And I think that's planned to change in the future. But it's essentially the custom primitive data has been around for a long time, but in Unreal 5, they improved it and they cleaned up the API, so it looks nicer on the meshes. Okay, so now we are ready to set these two parameters on our meshes themselves. So I'm just going to resize this. Okay. And so let's actually assign this material to these meshes. You could drag here in the details panel, or you could drag immediately directly on the meshes, which is pretty awesome. All right, so now how to set these, how do we set these parameters? You can actually go to the details panel, and then let's search for custom primitive data. So that will set the default values for your material. And what's really nice is that it actually has the name of your parameters. So for specular, I'm going to say this one has a specularity of 1. Okay, and then I can change the color. You can press the plus button. And then what's nice is you actually have a really nice color picker. So yeah, that one is very nice. I think it's this way because the name is color. I could double check that if I renamed my parameter. So I'm just gonna go ahead and change this to something else, like param3. Okay, no, it stays a color parameter. Maybe it's because usually this parameter is used mostly for color. So I'm just going to change that back to color. All right. And then what's nice is that this is set per mesh. So you could, but you can also batch edit. And so you could select a bunch of different meshes and set them this way. So specular, I guess I'll put half specularity. And then the color, I'm going to choose a nice peach color. You can also edit them individually. So this is really nice because you don't actually have to create a material instance for every single mesh. And it also saves on draw calls. I will link the documentation from Epic for this awesome feature. So it's called Custom Primitive Data. This next part, I want to show how you would actually set the default data inside a blueprint so that your mesh will hold the data, but you're not necessarily setting it from the instance itself. So this would be very useful for spline mesh actors. So I will search for spline mesh actor. Okay, there you go. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in. So if I set this to be a cylinder, and then forward axis will be on the Z. All right. So the spline mesh actor, you can deform it, but you can't add to it. You actually need to create a blueprint so that you spawn a bunch of different spline mesh actors. And that's what I'm going to use to make a pool noodle. But yeah, if you can set that material also on this spline mesh actor. Okay. And you can also search for custom primitive data. Okay, so same deal here. Let's add an element and let's make this one maybe a nice yellow. And specular 1. All right, so we're going to use that knowledge to create an actor that pretty much generates pool noodles. Okay, so let's go ahead and create a new blueprint. So right click in your content folder and then blueprint class. And we're going to just choose a basic actor. And I'll call this one B pool noodle. Okay. So let's go ahead and add a spline component. So for a long time, I was confusing the two. The spline can be used in a lot of ways, but essentially it is just a spline and it has points and tangents. And what we're going to do is in this blueprint, we're just going to make our spline mesh spawn on each one of these in between all the points, so that we'll have a nice noodle that just follows this spline. So just click on the spline one. Okay. And then let's go ahead and navigate to the construction script. If it's not here, you can just double click on this construction script. Okay. And so essentially, I'm just going to drop this in. So for this spline tool, what you can do is you can add points, you can move them. To add points, you click, you hold down Alt, and then you drag. So I'm just going to make a nice curve. Here you go. Okay, so this is the spline that I want my noodle to pretty much spawn. So I'd have 1, 2, 3 of these. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm just going to maximize this a little bit more. In the construction script, let's go ahead and drag your spline. And let's get the number of spline points. So, and then let's iterate or make a for loop. So for loop, and then your last index will be, so the number of spline points minus 2, and then your first index will be 0. So the number of spline points is 1, 2, 3, 4. We want it to iterate through 1, 2, 3, because we're going to just spawn a noodle in every single segment. So get number of spline points will give us 4, and then minus 2 because index at the first element is 0. So this will be 4 minus 2, so 2. So 0, 1, 2. So this is what we want. Okay. Okay, and then let's call add spline mesh component. Okay, so this will add a spline mesh component like this one here. And let's make that bigger. Okay. And so this will be our cone. Or, sorry. So this will be our cylinder. And then our material will be that material. So I'll just drag that in. Okay, and then our forward axis will be Z. Okay, so you can see there's already one that's being spawned because we're calling it, I mean, technically we have 3, but they haven't been set their location and their start and end location. Okay, and their tangents either. Okay, so let's go ahead and set their start and end position and tangent points. What you can do is you can actually get that information from the spline itself. So I'm just going to do that. I don't actually need my viewport because I see it over here. Okay, so let's go ahead and call get location and tangent at spline point. Okay, so this will be our current index. And so that takes care of the first point. So now we need the second point. So we can also call the same function. So get location and tangent at spline point. And then the second one will be +1. Okay. And then we can call set start and end. And then let's plug these ones in. So your start position, your start tangent, your end position, and your end tangent. Okay, so we see this already has updated, which is nice. And you'll notice that it doesn't have any collision yet. So if we play, you go through it. Meanwhile, this one does have collision. So we're going to set that as well. Okay, so I'm going to double click on this connection. And then let's call set collision enabled. And then this is just query only is good. Okay. Okay, so now when I play, it will block my camera. All right, so now we actually want to set a default color that we can see in the editor and set. So I'm going to actually create a new variable for a linear color. So go ahead and navigate to your variables, and then let's add a variable. And this one will just be a linear color. And I will name this color. And I'll put this in the category custom primitive data. Okay, and I'll actually go ahead and add the specular also. So I'm going to just duplicate this, and then this one I'll change it to a float. And I will name this one specular. All right, so let's go ahead and actually call update that material. Okay, so drag off that pin, and let's call set default custom primitive data vector 4. Okay, so the data index is important because it will just match up with what you have in your material. So in our case, the color is at index 1. So that's what we want, 1. Okay, and then we can drag our color. So if you just drag, you'll get this option. But if you drag while holding Control, it will get it. And if you drag while holding Alt, it will set it, which is pretty neat. But yeah, you'll notice that you can't actually, you can't connect it directly. But what you can do is you can right-click Split Structure Pin, and then do the same for this one, Split Structure Pin. And then I'm going to drag these ones in. All right, and I will do the same thing for our specular. drag this off, set default custom primitive data float. And so these parameters could be anything that your material has, like even mesh size, or anything to do with any parameter really. So that one is at index 0, and I will drag in. Again, we can't drag that one in. Oh, interesting. So that one, I just want it to be a basic float. So not whatever this is, a float constant. So just a float is good. And I can input that one directly in there because they are the same type. Okay, let's save. And now we can try to find color. So it doesn't show up because we haven't exposed this variable into the instance mesh. So you can go ahead and make this one instance editable. And same thing with the specular. Okay, so now when I change it, and I change the value also, so it will update. And this will also work for a package game or play in an editor. So I'll just show here. So standalone game. So yeah, this is what it looks like in a standalone. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to go through how to set that data during runtime. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that. And for the next one, we're going to duplicate our blueprint. And this will be a pool noodle that changes color every second or every half second. So right click on your pool noodle and then duplicate. And then pool noodle changing colors. Okay, and let's go ahead and open that new blueprint. So this one still has all our construction script stuff, and I'm going to also drag it in. Okay. So I'm just going to add a few points. All right, so this one we can also set a custom default, just pretty much default color. So whenever it spawns. Okay. And so this one, let's go set up a timer and just call a function whenever it's been half a second. So I'm going to just do set timer. So set timer by event. And it's looping and it's half a second. And I'm going to go ahead and create a function because I want the color to be affected on every single piece and stay the same color. And it's nice to have a local variable for that color. So I'm going to add a new function. So under the function tab, just press the plus button. And then this one I will call it set new random color. Okay, and then in our local variables, I'm going to create a new linear color variable. And I call this one new color. And the linear color actually has a nice or very neat function for updating the color. So search for random and you'll stumble on linear color set random hue. So I actually like their comment. It says sets to a random color, chooses a quite nice color based on a random hue. So thank you Epic and the dev who created this function. Okay, so we will actually need to set every single spline mesh component. So we need to have a reference to it. So let's go ahead and navigate to your construction script. And at the end, after setting all this, we're going to promote this to a variable. So this one will be full full noodle bits. So and then we need to change that one to be an array because there's multiple of them. So change variable type, yes, is good. And then full noodle. So control and then let go. And then let's go to add. I'm just gonna maximize this so we can see better. And drag this in. Okay. And at the start, just for good measure, we're going to just empty it out. So drag and then alt and then let go. Or I think that's right. I don't think you can just do this. I think you need to drag, control, and then empty or clear. Yeah. So let's just clear all this. Okay, so now we actually have a reference to all our pull bits. And so, yeah, I'll go slowly with what we have. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our set new random color. And we're going to just iterate through all of these. And for each of these, this time we can't call the set default, but it is. So set, and then this time it is set custom primitive data vector 4. So this was the one that we use in the construction script, and it mostly just happens at the start. I've noticed that if you just call this, it won't actually show up in a package game. So the one you want is the set custom primitive data vector 4. And this one is a set in the runtime data only. So that's the one we want. And we're going to drag in our color. So we can actually drag and then break the color. And then split the structure. So for all the pull bits, make sure to set this custom primitive data vector 4 to this color. And there again, we got to make sure that it's the right index, or else it will technically set the specular to R, and then R to G, and then G to B. So it will be the wrong color, and your specular will be very different from what you want. Yeah, so our function is ready to set a random color. Now we just need to hook up the event to our timer. So what we can do is you can right click, you can drag off the event, and then in the event dispatchers, since we're using a function, so this is the one I'm going to use instead of a custom event. So click on create event, and we're going to select our set new random color. Okay, so every half a second, this will call this function, which pretty much sets the random color. So let's see if this actually works. So this is a nice purple when we start. And then let's just play in the viewport. Yeah, so nice. Every half a second, it changes color. Or it changes to a nice hue, as it says. I'm finding this has been really useful for coloring some color-coded cables in the map, or any kind of variation you want on static meshes. And it's nice because you don't need to create a million material instances. And this is a feature I really didn't know about until I saw that one talk that I will link in the description about, I think it's 35 things you didn't know about Unreal Engine 5, which was full of very good information. Yeah, thanks for watching.